When I first began researching the bells of 1914, I thought I was investigating a wartime metal shortage. What I found instead was something far more deliberate, because the bells that disappeared weren't just any bells. They were the largest, the oldest, the most precisely tuned instruments in Europe, and they vanished in a pattern that makes no sense unless you understand what they really were. The official story is simple. Governments needed bronze for artillery. The bells were melted down. Case closed. But that story collapses the moment you examine the records, because these bells weren't treated like scrap. They were removed with surgical precision, transported intact, stored in massive fields, and then the documentation stops. Not destroyed, not repurposed, just gone. And when you map which bells were taken and which were left behind, a pattern emerges that has nothing to do with metal weight and everything to do with frequency. I started noticing something in the architectural records. Bell towers across Europe share identical proportions, not similar, identical. The height to base ratio, the thickness of walls, the placement of acoustic chambers. These weren't built by local craftsmen experimenting with design. They follow a template that appears in regions separated by thousands of miles, regions that supposedly had no contact with each other. But they did have contact, because before nations, before borders, there was something else, a civilization that built in harmony with sound, a civilization we've been taught to forget. The name Tartaria appears in maps until the early 1800s, and then it vanishes, not gradually, completely, as if someone decided this territory, this history, this entire cultural framework needed to be erased. And the timing matters, because the same century that Tartaria disappears from maps is the century when bell towers stop being built as acoustic instruments and start being built as decoration, when the science becomes ritual, when the function becomes symbol. And by 1914, when the bells are removed, there's no one left who remembers what they were actually for. Let me show you what I mean. Every large bell ever cast follows a specific mathematical ratio: the diameter to height, the thickness of the wall, the curve of the profile. These ratios aren't arbitrary. They're tuned to produce not just a single note, but a harmonic series, a cascade of frequencies that interact with each other. Foundry records from the 1700s describe bells tuned to match the resonant frequency of the buildings they hung in. Some bells were tuned to match each other across distances, creating networks of synchronized vibration. And when you map these networks, they don't follow political boundaries. They follow geometric patterns, patterns that make sense only if you think of them as a grid. Now here's where it gets strange. When these bells rang, they didn't just produce sound, they produced low-frequency vibration, infrasound, frequencies below the range of human hearing, but well within the range of human perception. Because your body doesn't just hear sound, it feels it. Your organs resonate, your neural patterns synchronize. And if you're standing in a town where 15 bells are ringing in harmonic sequence, you're not just hearing music, you're inside an electromagnetic field generated by acoustic resonance, and that field doesn't stop at your skin. Modern science has documented this. Infrasound affects consciousness. It alters brainwave patterns. It can induce calm or unease depending on the frequency, and it travels far, much farther than audible sound. A single large bell ringing at the right frequency can be felt for miles, not heard, felt, which means a network of bells ringing in sequence could theoretically create a standing wave across an entire region, a continuous field of low-frequency resonance that everything inside it would be subject to, including you. So let me ask you this. If you wanted to control a population, would you want them living inside a harmonic field they didn't create? A field that synchronized their biology without their knowledge? A field that couldn't be shut off, couldn't be regulated, couldn't be owned? Or would you want that field destroyed and replaced with something you could control, something mechanical, something centralized, something that belongs to you? In 1914, the bells come down, all across Europe, simultaneously, in countries that are at war with each other, enemies cooperating on a single objective. The official reason is metal, but the numbers don't work. The total bronze from all the bells removed wouldn't supply even a fraction of the artillery shells used in World War I. And yet, the operation continues, carefully, methodically. Every large bell, every old bell, every bell that matches the harmonic profile, they're tagged, transported, stored, as if someone is curating them, not scrapping them. I found photographs, dozens of them, open fields filled with bells arranged in rows, each bell upright, each bell intact. These aren't scrap piles, these are inventories, and the locations matter because these fields are always near rail lines, always near military zones, never near foundries. If the goal was to melt them down, why not do it on site? Why transport them hundreds of miles? Why store them? Why catalog them? Unless the goal wasn't to destroy them, it was to silence them. And here's the detail that kept me awake. The bells that were left behind, the ones that survived 1914, they're all wrong. Small bells, decorative bells, bells that don't match the harmonic ratios. The bells that were taken follow a pattern. They're tuned to specific frequencies, frequencies that overlap, frequencies that, when rung together, create standing waves. And those are the bells that vanish, every single one. Which means someone knew, someone understood what these bells did, and they made sure those bells could never ring again. After 1914, something changes. Compare cities before and after. Pre-war photographs show towns organized around bell towers, daily life moving in sync. Post-war, the same buildings, but people move differently, fragmented, as if the invisible structure holding them together has been cut. Then comes the replacement, mechanical clocks, factory whistles, air raid sirens. Every city installs them, not as response to need, but as coordinated program. And these new systems don't create harmony, they create command. One sound, one meaning. You don't synchronize with a siren, you obey it. I started looking at what else changes. Urban planning shifts, buildings get taller, acoustic dead zones appear, places where sound doesn't carry, where communities fragment. It's as if architecture is being redesigned to prevent what the bells created, and no one notices because no one remembers. Then there's health data. Medical records from the 1920s show spikes in reports that didn't exist before. Sleep disturbances, nervous disorders, disconnection described again and again. People don't know what's wrong. Doctors can't explain it. But what if the problem is that the ambient field that regulated human biology for centuries has been switched off? Here's what happened. The civilization that built these towers understood something we've forgotten. They understood sound isn't just communication, it's infrastructure. They built a network of resonance that covered continents, and that network did more than mark time. It regulated biology, it synchronized communities, it created coherence. And when dismantled, something fundamental broke. But why? Why would anyone destroy a system that created harmony? The answer is control. Because a harmonic system is decentralized. It belongs to everyone and no one. It can't be monopolized. And if you're building an industrial empire, a world where energy flows through systems you own, where time is money and compliance is mandatory, then harmony is your enemy. Because harmony makes people self-sufficient. So the bells come down, and the world that replaces them is louder, faster, harsher, more fragmented. Mechanical time replaces natural rhythm. Sirens replace song. And within a generation, no one remembers what was lost, because the people who knew are gone, and the people who remain think this is normal. They think the world has always been this way. They don't know they're living in the ruins of something older, something more sophisticated, something that didn't require owners. And here's the final piece. After 1914, bells are never restored, not systematically. Funds are allocated, promises are made, and then nothing. Churches remain silent, towers remain empty, and when new bells are installed, they're different, smaller, decorative. They don't match the old ratios. They don't connect to each other. They're symbols, not instruments. The knowledge is gone. The craft is gone. And no one asks why, because by then, the story has changed. The bells weren't infrastructure. They were relics. They were quaint. They were superstition. And who needs superstition when you have science?
But what if the science was theirs? What if the superstition is ours? What if we're the ones living in ignorance, calling our fragmentation progress, calling our disconnection freedom? What if the world we think is advanced is actually a downgrade, and the civilization we've been taught to dismiss as primitive, as mythical, as Tartaria, understood things we're only now beginning to rediscover? Because modern research keeps circling back to the same conclusions. Sound affects biology. Frequency affects consciousness. Resonance affects matter. The ancients weren't primitive. They were precise. And the infrastructure they built wasn't just functional. It was harmonic. It was elegant. It worked with nature, not against it. And when it was destroyed, we lost more than bells. We lost a way of being in the world. So when you see those empty towers, when you walk through cities that feel just slightly wrong, just slightly too harsh, too loud, too disconnected, when you feel that nameless unease, that sense that something fundamental is missing, maybe you're not imagining it. Maybe you're feeling the absence of something that was always there until it wasn't. Maybe you're standing in a world that was redesigned and no one told you. The bells of Tartaria weren't removed because they were obsolete. They were removed because they still worked. And what they did, what they created, couldn't be allowed to continue because the world being built required their silence. And a century later, we're still living in that silence, not knowing what we lost, not hearing what's missing, not remembering that there was ever anything else. But the towers remain, and the chambers remain, and the physics remain. And once you understand what was taken, once you see the pattern, once you hear the silence for what it is, you can't unhear it, because some things once known cannot be forgotten, and some questions once asked cannot be ignored. And the question that started this investigation has become something much larger. If they could erase an entire system of infrastructure built over centuries and make us forget it ever existed, what else have we forgotten? What else are we standing inside without knowing? And who benefits from our ignorance? Let me show you something else buried in architectural surveys. From the 1600s through the 1800s, bell towers were built with features that make no sense as decoration. Spiral acoustic chambers, internal resonance cavities, apertures angled at precise degrees. These features appear in towers separated by vast distances, built by different architects. Yet the proportions match, the angles match, as if everyone was working from the same blueprint, a blueprint that has never been found. I went back to the removal records, and I noticed the language. The orders don't say confiscate, they say neutralize. That word appears again and again, neutralize, as if these bells were threats. The documents never explain. They simply list locations, dimensions, frequencies, and then that word, neutralize. And then there's the timing. World War I begins July 1914. The bell removals begin August, simultaneously. Even in neutral countries, Switzerland, Sweden, their bells come down too. Not for war, they weren't at war, Their bells were removed under different pretexts, but the result is identical. The largest, oldest bells, the ones tuned to specific frequencies, they all disappear at the same time, as if someone coordinated this, as if the war was cover. I found testimony from a bell founder in Prague written in 1919. He describes how knowledge was passed down for 11 generations, how each bell was tuned to what he calls the earth tone, a fundamental frequency. In 1914, officials came with documents. They wanted a list, every bell his family had cast, their locations, their frequencies. Within weeks, every bell was gone. He never cast another. He writes that the knowledge died, that no one wanted to learn, that bells had become just metal. When asked what was lost, he wrote only, "The bells used to sing to each other. Now, there is only silence." This phrase appears in other accounts. All of them describe the bells as singing to each other. All of them describe a network, not between people, but between the bells themselves, as if the bells were nodes in a system. And when the bells were removed, they write, the world became deaf. Not literally, but something in the atmosphere, something in the fabric of space, stopped responding. Modern physics has a term for this, coherence. When oscillators sync up, when individual frequencies merge into a unified field. Pendulums do it, neurons do it, and bells, massive bronze bells with precisely tuned harmonics ringing at specific intervals, absolutely would do it. They would create coherent fields, fields that span distances, fields that affect everything within them, including biology, including consciousness, including the fundamental resonance of matter itself. So imagine you're in 1910 in a town with 5 churches. Each has bells ringing multiple times per day. When they ring, they create overlapping waves of infrasound, waves your body synchronizes with, your heart rate, your breathing, all entrained to the ambient frequency. You don't notice it. It's always been there. But what you do notice is connection. Your nervous system is phase-locked with everyone else. You move together, not because you plan to, because the field makes it natural. Cooperation isn't effort, it's physics. The field maintains harmony. Now imagine that field is suddenly gone. The bells stop. No one explains why. You just wake up one day and the pulse is gone. You feel off, disconnected. Sleep becomes harder. You argue with your neighbor more, not because anything changed, because the thing that kept you in sync is gone, and you don't know how to function without it, because you never knew it was there. This is what happened on a continental scale. The bells created a coherent field across Europe, a field that synchronized populations, and harmony prevents division. Harmony is decentralized. Harmony doesn't need leaders, it self-organizes. So if you want to centralize power, if you want populations that respond to commands rather than coordinate naturally, then harmony is your obstacle, and the bells must go. The war provided the perfect excuse, national emergency. No one questions it. And by the time the war ends, the world has moved on. Clocks regulate time, sirens provide warnings, radio broadcasts information, centralized, one way, from authority to population. No more singing to each other, no more networks, just transmission, just command. And it works, because people have forgotten what it felt like. They think this fragmented state is normal. They don't know they're living in the ruins. And here's the most disturbing part. The few bells that survived are being removed now by universities, by preservation societies. They say the bells need protection, that ringing causes damage, so they're silenced. New bells are electronic, recorded sounds through speakers. They look like bells, but they don't create fields. They're simulations. Because once you see it, once you understand what the bells were, what they did, you realize this wasn't about war. This was about control, about severing humanity from a technology we didn't know we had. A technology that made us coherent, connected, synchronized. A technology that didn't require fuel or corporations, a technology that just was. And that's exactly why it had to go. Because you can't monetize harmony, you can't control coherence, you can't own resonance. And a world built on ownership, on control, on division cannot allow harmony to exist. So the bells came down and the silence began. And we've been living in that silence ever since, not knowing what we lost, not understanding that the disconnection, the anxiety, the sense that something fundamental is broken isn't natural, it's engineered. And the engineering began in 1914, when the bells stopped singing and the world forgot to listen.